بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد النبي وآله وسلم تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد لك الحمد اللهم لك الحمد على ما جرى به قضاءك في أوليائك الذين استخلصتهم لنفسك ودينك إذ اخترت لهم جزيل ما عندك من النعيم المقيم الذي لا زوال له ولا المحلال بعد أن شرت عليهم الزهد في درجات هذه الدنيا الدنية وزخرفها وزمرجها فشرتوا لك ذلك وعلمت منهم الوفاء به فقبلتهم وقربتهم وقدمت لهم الذكر العلي والثناء الجلي وأهبت عليهم ملائكتك وكرمتهم بوحيك ورفعتهم بعلمك وجعلتهم الذريعة إليك والوسيلة إلى رضوانك فبعض أسكنته جنتك إلا أن أخرجته منها وبعض حملته في فلكك ونجيته ومن آمن معه من الهلكة برحمتك وبعض اتخذته لنفسك خليلا وسلك لسان صدق في الآخرين فأجبته وجعلت ذلك عليا وبعض كلمته من شجرة تكليما وجعلت له من أخيه ردا ووزيرا وبعض أولته من غير أب وآتيته البينات وأيدته بروح القدس وكل شرعت له شريعة ونهجت له منهاجا وتخيرت له أوصياء مستحفظا بعد مستحفظ من مدة إلى مدة إقامة لدينك وحجة على عبادك ولئلا يزول الحق عن مقره ويغلب الباطل على أهله ولا يقول أحد لولا أرسلت إلينا رسولا منذرا وأقمت لنا علما هاديا فنتبع آياتك من قبل أن نذل وتخزى نذل ونخزى إلى أن انتهيت بالأمر إلى حبيبك ونجيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وآله فكان كما انتجبته سيد من خلقت وصفة من استفيت وأفضل من اجتبيت وأكرم من اعتمدت قدمته على أنبيائك وبعثته إلى الثقلين من عبادك وأوتأته مشارقك ومغاربك وسخرت له البراق وعرجت بروحي إلى سمائك وأودعته علم ما كان وما يكون إلى انقضاء خلقك ثم نصرته بالرعب وحفظته بجبريل وميكائيل والمسومين من ملائكتك ووعدته أن تظهر دينه على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون وذلك بعد أن بوأته مبوأ صدق من أهله وجعلت له ولهم أول بيت موضع للناس للذي ببكة مباركة وهدى للعالمين فيه آيات بينات مقام إبراهيم ومن دخله كان آمنا وقلت إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ثم جعلت أجر محمد صلواتك عليه وآل مودتهم في كتابك، فقلت قل لا أسألكم علي أجرا إلا المودة في القربى، وقلت ما سألتكم من أجر فهو لكم، وقلت ما أسألكم عليه من أجر إلا من شاء أن يتخذ إلى ربي سبيلا، فكانوا هم السبيل إليك والمسلك إلى رضوانك. فلما انقضت أيامه أقام وليه علي بن أبي طالب صلواتك عليهما وآلهما هاديا، إذ كان هو المنذر ولكل قوم هاد. فقال والملأ أمام من كنت مولاه فعلي مولاه. اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه وانصر من نصر واخذل من خذله. وقال من كنت أنا نبيه فعلي أمير، وقال أنا وعلي من شجرة واحدة وسائر الناس من شجرة شتى. وأحله محل هارون من موسى، فقال له أنت مني بمنزلة هارون من موسى، إلا أنه لا نبي بعدي. وزوجه ابنته سيدة نساء العالمين، وأحل له من مسجده ما حل له، وسند الأبواب إلى بابه، ثم أودعه علمه وحكمته، فقال أنا بني مدينة العلم وعلي بابها، فمن أراد المدينة والحكمة فلياتها من بابها. ثم قال أنت أخي ووسي ووارثي، لحمك من لحمي ودمك من دمي وسلمك من سلمي وحربك حربي، والإيمان مخالط لحمك ودمك ما خالت لحمي ودمي، وأنت غدا على الحوض خليفتي، وأنت تقضي ديني وتنجز عداتي، وشيعتك على منابر من نور مبيضة وجوههم حولي في الجنة وهم جيراني. ولولا أنت يا علي لم يعرف المؤمنون بعدي، وكان بعده هدى من الضلال ونورا من العمى، وحبل الله المتين وصراطه المستقيم، لا يسبق بقرابة في رحم ولا بسابقة في دين، ولا يلحق في منقبة من مناقبه يهدو حذو الرسول صلى الله عليهما وآلهما، ويقاتل على التأويل، ولا تأخذوا في الله لومة لائم، وترى فيه سناديد العرب، وقتل أمطالهم وناوش ذوبانهم، فأودع قلوبهم أحقادا بذرية وخيبرية وحنينية وغيرهن، فأضبت على عداوته وكنبت على منابذته، حتى قتل الناكثين والقاسطين والمارقين. ولما قضى نحبه وقتله أشقى الآخرين يتبع أشقى الأولين، لم يمتثل أمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله في الهادين بعد الحادين، والأمه مسرة على مقته مجتمعة على قطيعة لحمه وإقصاء ولده إلى القليل، ممن وفى لرعاية الحق فيهم، فقتل من قتل وسبي من سبي وأقسي من أقسي، وجرى القضاء لهم بما يرجى له حسن المثلوب. إذ كانت الأرض لله يورثها من يشاء من عباده والعاقبة للمتقين. وسبحان ربنا إن كان وعد ربنا لمفعولا ولن يخلف الله وعده وهو عزيز حكيم. فعلى الأطوائب من أهل بيت محمد وعلي صلى الله عليهما وآلهما فليبكي الباكون وإياهم فليندب النادبون، ولمثلهم فلتذرف الدموع وليصرخ الصارخون ويذج الضاجون ويعج العاجون. أين الحسن أين الحسين أين أبناء الحسين؟ صالح بعد صالح وصادق بعد صادق، أين السبيل بعد السبيل؟ أين الخيرة بعد الخيرة؟ أين الشموس الطالعة؟ أين الأقمار المنيرة؟ أين الأنجم الزاهرة؟ أين أعلام الدين وقواعد العلم؟ أين بقية لله التي لا تخلو من العترة الهادية؟ أين المعد لقطع دابر الظلمة؟ أين المنتظر لإقامة الأمت والعباج؟ أين المرتجى لإزالة الجور والعدوان؟ أين المدخر لتجديد الفرائض والسنن؟ أين المتخير لإعادة الملة والشريعة؟ أين المؤمل لإحياء الكتاب وحدوده؟ أين محيي معالم الدين وأهله؟ أين قاسم شوكة المعتدين؟ أين هادم أبنية الشرك والنفاق؟ أين مبيد أهل الفسوق والعصيان والطغيان؟ أين حاسد فروغ الغي والشقاق؟ أين طامس آثار الزيغ والأهواء؟ أين قاطع حبائل الكذب والافتراء؟ أين مبيد العطاة والمردة؟ أين مستأصل أهل العناد والتذليل والإلحاد؟ أين معز الأولياء ومذل الأعداء؟ أين جامع الكلمة على التقوى؟ أين باب الله الذي منه يؤتى؟ أين وجه الله الذي لا يتوجه الأولياء؟ أين السبب المتصل بين الأرض والسماء؟ أين صاحب يوم الفتح وناشر راية الهدى؟ أين مؤلف شمل الصلاح والرضا؟ أين الطالب بذحول الأنبياء وأبناء الأنبياء؟ أين الطالب بدم المقتول بكربلاء؟ أين المنصور على من اعتدى عليه وافتراه؟ أين المضطر الذي يجاب إذا دعا؟ أين الستر خلائق ذو البر والتقوى؟ أين ابن النبي المصطفى وابن علي المرتضى وابن خديجة الغراء وابن فاطمة الكبرى؟ بأبي أنت وأمي ونفسي لك الوقاء والحماء. يا ابن السعادة المقربين، يا ابن النجباء الأكرمين، يا ابن الهداة المهديين، يا ابن الخيارة المعذبين، يا ابن الغطارفة الأنجبين، يا ابن الطائب المطهرين، يا ابن الخضارمة المنتجبين، يا ابن القماقمة الأكرمين، يا ابن البدور المنيرة، يا ابن السروج المزية، يا ابن الشهوب الثاقبة، يا ابن الأنجم الزاهرة، يا ابن السبول الواضحة، يا ابن الأعلام اللائحة، يا ابن العلوم الكاملة، يا ابن السنن المشهورة، يا ابن المعالم المأثورة، يا ابن المعجزات الموجودة، يا ابن الدلائل المشهودة، يا ابن الصراط المستقيم. يا ابن النبي العظيم، يا ابن من هو في أم الكتاب لدى الله علي حكيم، يا ابن الآيات والبينات، يا ابن الدلائل الظاهرات، يا ابن البراهين الواضحات الباهرات، يا ابن الحجج البالغات، يا ابن النعم السابغات، يا ابن طه والمحكمات، يا ابن ياسين والزاريات، يا ابن التور والعاديات، يا ابن من دنا فتدلى فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى، دنوا واقترابا من العلي الأعلى. ليت شعري أين استقرت بك النوى، بل أي أرض تقلك أو سرى، أبي رزوى أو غيرها أم زيت عزيز علي أن أرى الخلق ولا ترى، ولا أسمع لك حسيسا ولا نجوى. عزيز علي أن تهيت بك دنيا البلوى، ولا ينالك مني زجيج ولا شكوى. بنفسي أنت من مغيبي لم يخلو منا، بنفسي أنت من نازح ما نزح عنا، بنفسي أنت أمنية شائق يتمنى، من مؤمن ومؤمنة ذكرها فهنا، بنفسي أنت من عقيد عزا ولا لا يسامى، بنفسي أنت من أسيل مجد لا يجارى، مجد لا يجارى، بنفسي أنت من تلاد نعم لا تزاحى، بنفسي أنت من نفسي في شرف لا يساوى. إلى متى أحار فيك يا مولاي، وإلى متى وأي خطاب آسف فيك وأي نجوى. عزيز علي أن أجاب دونك وأناغ، عزيز علي أن أبكيك ويحزلك الوراء، عزيز علي أن يجري عليك دونهم ما جرى. هل من معين فأطيل معه العويل والبكاء، هل من جزوع فأساعد جزعه إذا خلا. هل قضيت عين فساعدتها عيني على القضاء، هل إليك يا ابن أحمد سبيل فتلقى. قل هل يتصل يومنا منك بعدة فتحظى، متى نرد مناهلك الروية فنروى، متى ننتفع من عذب مائك فقد طال الصدى، متى نغاديك ونرابحك فنقر عينا، متى ترانا ونراك وقد نشرت اليماء النسي ترى. أترانا نحف بك وأنت تعم الملاء، وقد ملأت الأرض عدلا، وأذقت أعداءك هوانا وإقابا، وأبرت العتاة وجهدت الحق، وقطعت دابر المتكبرين، واجتثثت أصول الظالمين، ونحن نقول الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم أنت كشاف الكرب والبلوى، وإليك أستعذ فعندك العطاء، وأنت رب الآخرة والدنيا فاغث يا غياث المستغيثين. عبيدك المبتلى وأره سيده يا شديد القوى، وأذل عنه بالأسى والجوى، وبرد غليله يا من على العرش استوى، ومن إليه الرجعى والمنتهى. اللهم ونحن عبيدك الطائقون إلى وليك المذكر بك وبنبيك، خلقته لنا اسمة وملاذا، وأقمته لنا قواما ومعاذا، وجعلته للمؤمنين منا إماما، فبلغه منا تحية وسلاما، وزدنا بذلك يا رب إكراما، واجعل مستقره لنا مستقرا ومقاما، وأنعم نعمتك بتقديمك إياه أمامنا، حتى تؤردنا بجنانك ومرافقة الشهداء من خلصائك. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد، وصل على محمد جده ورسولك السيد الأكبر وعلى أبي السيد الأصغر وجدته الصديقة الكبرى فاطمة بنت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وعلى من استفيت من آبائه البررة وعليه أفضل وأكمل وأتم وأدوم وأكثر وأوفر ما صليت على أحد من أصفيائك وخيرتك من خلقك وصل عليه صلاة لا غاية لعددها ولا نهاية لمددها ولا نفاذ لأمدها. اللهم واقم به الحق وأدهر به الباطل وأدل به أوليائك وأضلل به أعدائك وصل اللهم بيننا وبينهم وصلة تؤدي إلى مرافقة سلفه واجعلنا ممن يأخذ بحجتهم ويمكث في ذلهم وأعنا على تأدية حقوقه إليه والاجتهاد في طاعته واجتناب معصيته وامن علينا برضاه وهب لنا رأفة ورحمة ودعاءه وخيره ما ننال به سعة من رحمتك وفوزا عندك واجعل صلاتنا به مقبولة وذنوبنا به مغفورة ودعانا به مستجابا واجعل أرزاقنا به مبسوطة وهمومنا به مكفية وهوائجنا به مقضية وأقبل إلينا بوجهك الكريم واقبل تقربنا إليك وانظر إلينا نظرة رحيمة نستكمل بها الكرامة عندك ثم لا تصرفها عنا بجودك واسقنا من حوض جده صلى الله عليه وآله بكنزه وبيده ريا رويا هنيا سائغا لا ظمأ بعده يا أرحم الراحمين. صلى الله على محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين علي ولي الله. أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين علي حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم اجعل قلبي بار وعملي سار وعيشي كار ورزقي دار وأولادي أبرار واجعل عند قبر نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وآله مستقرا وقرارا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Amma ba'd. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My congratulations to you all on today, the day of Friday, a day of Eid for the mu'mineen, and a day in which we continue our discussion and lessons from the Holy Quran. We've been discussing the 76th chapter of the Holy Quran, Suratul Insan, or Dahar, or Hal Ata, as we discussed in our last conversation. We begin our discussion by mentioning from the third verse in which Allah says, Inna hadaynahu sabilan imma shakiran wa imma kafura. And we mentioned and we did the tafsir of this verse in our last discussion. However, we include that Allah mentions and He says, we have guided humanity and mankind to the right way. Hadaynahu sabila. And then Allah concludes, Imma shakiran wa imma kafura. Whether he be grateful or he be ungrateful. This elaboration of someone who is grateful or ungrateful to Allah, now Allah explains the consequences of the one who is ungrateful and the one who is grateful. The fourth verse specifies and begins, where we begin our conversation of verses today, begins the discussion of the one who is ungrateful. Allah explains and He says, those who are ungrateful and do not follow His guidance, إِنَّا أَعْتَدْنَا لِلْكَافِرِينَ سَلَاسِلَ وَأَغْلَالًا سَعِيرًا. Allah describes the condition of the people who don't follow His guidance, who don't listen to His message, and He says that certainly for those who are faithless, إِنَّا أَعْتَدْنَا لِلْكَافِرِينَ, we've prepared for those who are the disbelievers, who are faithless, who refuse to follow the guidance of Allah, سَلَاسِلَ وَأَغْلَالًا سَعِيرًا. Salasila comes from chains or shackles. That these salasila comes from the singular of salsala, which is also referenced in Surah Al-Haqq, fi salsalati dhara'aha sab'una dhara'an, that in chains whose length is 70 cubits, describing the chains in which a person will be punished on the Day of Judgment. Aghlalan refers to a yoke. There are 3 or 4 different descriptions of what this could mean. That aghlalan could be a wooden frame with bars or hoops on either end of it in which a person is held by these chains, or a harness that's used, for example, for oxen is also called aghlalan. Here, many of the Mufassirin point to that this describes a heavy iron ring that is held on the neck or hands and is fastened with a chain. Then Allah completes, وَسَعِيرًا, and that there will be a blaze that is set for them. The interesting point of how Allah describes the punishment for those who are faithless is not just the fire of hell, but captivity as well. That there's no escape from this. That Allah didn't just say enough that no, you'll be thrown into the fire of hell. Sometimes, for example, the mental image that may come is hell is a place of punishment. But no, it's a place of punishment and captivity. That the difficulty that Allah describes for it is extreme and one that should cause both fear and concern, such that one should seek the protection of Allah from such descriptions where Allah describes the severity and the torture and the punishment that is for the one who disbelieves. Here Allah describing that the one who is imma kafura, we saw that for him is the chains and the shackles and the fire. Now Allah begins the description in the 5th verse of the one who is the believer is shakiran. This verse, the 5th verse, is an interesting discussion. In it we see Allah makes a statement, Innal abrara yashrabuna min ka'sin kana mizajuha kafura. Now Allah describes that on one side He gave the explanation of those who will suffer punishment in the hereafter because they didn't follow the guidance. Now He begins the description of the one who receives a reward for following the guidance. Innal abrara, that's certainly the pious. This term abrar is very interesting. In one description, abrar comes from bar, which means broadness and expansiveness. And which is why when we have a dry piece of land or vast expansive open land, it's called bar, as opposed to large bodies of water. And this bar refers to a big open piece of land. This term is applied to the righteous people because their good deeds have extensive effects on themselves and their society. So when we refer to abrar, someone who is abrar, one of the explanations is the one who is pious, one who is righteous, one whose good deeds are expansive in front of him. So Allah now explains those who are shakiran, those who are thankful to Him, are those who are referred to as abrar. It goes even further that Al-Hasan, in his tafsir, as he does tafsir of this verse, as explained in Majma' al-Bayan, those who do not harm even an ant and do not condone evil are the ones who are referred to as abrar. Others said that those who fulfill both obligatory and voluntary, meaning mustahab, wajib and mustahab duties, are referred to as abrar. However, this term of abrar, and whether it applies to shakiran or applies to something else, is a topic of discussion because it also, many of the mufassirin agree that innal abrara, those who are referred to as the righteous in this verse, refers to none other than Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That this abrar refers to the Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Prophet, and it describes and says, يَشْرِبُونَ مِنْ كَأْسٍ كَانَ مِزَاجُهَا كَافُورًا, that they will be the ones who are in heaven drinking from a cup seasoned with kafur. The reason that this abrar, this 5th verse, either ties to the 3rd verse of describing shakiran or ties to the 6th verse that describes a story that's related to the Ahlul Bayt. So some look at it and say abraran refers to those who are thankful to Allah and who follow His guidance. Others say this abraran refers specifically to the Ahlul Bayt and the story of the Ahlul Bayt that begins its mention in the next verse. After this we see that Allah says yashrabuna min ka'sin, they drink from a cup, kana mizajuha kafura, that is seasoned or is like that of kafur. This description of a vessel that is mixed with kafur, this kafur in particular, there are 2 descriptions to it. One description is to say that kafur that we see today on this earth is something that has a very cool texture to it, and it's cool in texture and cool in flavor. And it's one of those heavenly objects that we possess that presents coolness, and this is in opposition to where we see the people of the fire of hell who are sa'ira, in a blaze, that Allah describes that in comparison to them, that these people will be drinking from what the closest comparison that Allah can offer is kafur, that is always cool to the touch and cool to the flavor, and never something that is harmful. Others actually point to and say that this mizajuha kafura, kafur in this context refers to a spring or a source, a river, a body of water that flows in Jannah, and refers to one of the bodies of water in heaven that people can benefit from. When we read the descriptions of heaven, there are a variety of different rivers that run in heaven that are different in flavor, texture, and appeal, that are supposed to appeal to the mu'mineen and invite them to look to the bounties and blessings of Jannah and the pleasures of heaven, and one of them being this Ka'fur. The context of Ka'fur, referring to a river, comes from the following verse: "Aynan yashrabu biha ibadullahi yufajjirunaha tafjira." That the reason that Ka'fur here is referred to instead of the Ka'fur that you and I know and we refer and discuss to, is referring to a spring in heaven, because the next verse begins with the word Aynan, and that Ayn is a spring. So Ka'fur's elaboration is provided in the next verse to show that this is one of the springs and rivers of heaven, that this is something to look forward to. The reason that it's interesting to point out why it could be that it's something like Ka'fur that we know here, or it's something completely different, is that we've never seen heaven. So when Allah wants to talk about heaven, usually the descriptions of heaven are analogous to things that we are familiar with in this world, things that we may appreciate, things that we may know about, things that may benefit us, so as that we have some concept of trying appreciating what exists in heaven. But being that none of us have seen it, all we can do is pull the analogy and imagine that this is what the reference is. So here Allah pointing to Ka'fur, and why some of the Mufassireen say that, oh, this is the Ka'fur that we use. I know most of us today in contemporary environment only know Ka'fur from when we do the tadfeen of a person. But in general, Ka'fur was something that was very light and was very appreciative, and is one of those things that, for example, in its qualities, was paralleled with amberjace and other items of good value and musk of good value that people preferred and liked. So hence Allah draws a parable of Ka'fura, and we say that this Ka'fura likely refers to one of the rivers in heaven, because in the 6th verse Allah says, "Aynan yashrabu biha ibadullahi yufajjirunaha tafjira." Allah describes in the 6th verse, He says, there is a spring in heaven where Allah's servants will drink from. So Allah mentions Ka'fur, and then He says this is a spring in heaven that Allah's servants will drink from, making it gush forth as they please. This description, I think the easiest way to make it an example is, imagine that there's a spring in heaven with heavenly water that you can make come and serve you whenever you desire. The only example I could think of is kind of like a fountain soda. But it's not a fountain soda, it's much more in-depth than that. A fountain soda is a source of something you enjoy that you can take whenever you desire. But here the description Allah is saying is not that you take it whenever you desire, but He's describing and saying, يُفَجِّرُونَهَا تَفْجِيرًا, that you make it gush forward. It's that you can send that river any which direction you choose, and you can give it to others. In this explanation of how is it possible that one can guide a river and move a river in different directions, we see a hadith from our 5th Imam, Muhammad ibn Ali Al-Baqer alayhi salam, that this is a fountain that's placed in the house of the Prophet, and from it flows to the house of the previous prophets and the believers only, that those who kept Iman in our Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt are the ones who will benefit from this river that flows in heaven. Thus the Prophet is the one who guides it and gives it direction to where it will go, and that wherever the Prophet desires it will be given. In this world we see and say that the reason that this is most likely to be a true analogy is that the same way that from the Prophet flows the true river of knowledge into society, and that the hidayah of the Prophet today flows to those who follow him, the same way that that is a unique example of the benefit and association with the Prophet, here Allah is describing a physical existence that in the same way today, those who benefit from the ilm and the river of knowledge that flows from the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, in Akhirah they will be entitled to a physical river of benefit that only they can achieve because of their attachment to the Holy Prophet. In another of these tafsirs, the explanation comes to say that this river that can be moved is that this is a river that can be directed from its spring and from its source wherever you wish, to the palaces and dwellings in paradise. Today, the way we make the effort of making running water, we require a lot of effort to bring water from one location to another. But in heaven, the mu'min has the ability that should he choose, there is no need for him to create tracks and to push things and to force things, but rather simply by his desire, the objects will follow his instruction and will go in the direction that they should so choose, such that these gushing streams is that it goes effortlessly to wherever you desire and fulfills your needs, and there's no need for channels and digging, and whatever you desire in this process of gaining access to this benefit, that once Allah has entitled you to it, you can take from it wherever you choose, and you don't have to exert extra effort to gain its value. This discussion about the people who are shakiran, those who are thankful to Allah, and those who are the abrar, and that the benefit that they will have in access to these gardens in heaven, is considered a preamble to the discussion that now begins in the 7th verse, that talks about the story of the Ahlul Bayt that's very famous in Surah Al-Insan. And there is no debate about the fact that is this story about the Ahlul Bayt or not. And as we mentioned, one of the disagreements in the history of Islam, that is Surah Insan a Makki surah or a Madani surah. The argument being it's a Makki surah is on the principle that this story then could be said that it's not about the Ahlul Bayt. Because the story itself shows the fadilat and azamat of the Ahlul Bayt and gives 5 attributes for people to follow in this story. The story famously goes that when Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain were sick, they went to the Prophet, and the Prophet gave instruction to Imam Ali and Sayyidah Zahra that fast, make a vow that you will fast for 3 days if your children are cured. When the children are cured, Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima, when they intend to keep their fast, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain, and Fidda all agree and fast together. The first day when they fast, they have no food in the house, so Imam Ali goes and he takes a loan of wheat, sufficient to produce food for 3 days while they're fasting. And upon the first day, upon completing their fast, a poor person comes and they give their food to the poor person. The second day of fasting, an orphan comes, they give their food to the orphan. On the third day, a prisoner comes and they give their food to the prisoner. On the fourth day, when the children's condition is very weak and they go to see the Prophet and they go visit Rasulullah sees them, and as he sees them in this condition, seeing the sacrifices they made to serve humanity, we see that Allah reveals these verses in showing the quality and attribute of who these personalities are. Understanding that backstory, now we look and we see the 7th verse begins with يُوفُونَ بِالنَّذْرِ وَيَخَافُونَ يَوْمًا كَانَ شَرُّهُ مُسْتَتِيرًا. They fulfill their vows. يُوفُونَ بِالنَّذْرِ and يُخَافُونَ يَوْمًا كَانَ شَرُّهُ مُسْتَتِيرًا, and they fear the day whose ill will be widespread. This discussion gives us 2 attributes of those who Allah refers to as abrar and righteous. The first of those is that they are those people who fulfill their vows. They fulfill their commitments and they fulfill their obligations regardless of the difficulty that may come upon them to complete their promises that they have made. We see this in the aspect that look at it as a normal person. You don't have food in your house. First and foremost, if you don't have food in your house, would you agree to fast in this condition? You would say, no, I'll fast once I can get access to food. Let me prepare my resources, and then I'll go to fast. But the attribute of the Ahlul Bayt was such that they preferred to fast because that was their commitment, even if they didn't have food, and therefore they took a loan. 2, in that process of fulfilling the loan, let's say, for example, that I'm in a situation where I'm fasting and someone comes in need to me, and I prefer to give them their need. What would I say? I would say that, oh, well, let me wait until I can get more food, then I'll fast the rest of these fasts. But they continue the process of fulfilling their oath, because the responsibility that when you make a nadhr and when you make an oath, you should fulfill it immediately. And this is a reminder for all of us that if we make a nadhr, an oath, once it comes due, prefer that oath to fulfill it as quickly as possible and with diligence that's required. وَيَخَافُونَ يَوْمٌ كَانَ شَرُّهُ مُسْتَتِيرًا, and they fear that day, or they are conscious of that day. This idea, يُخَافُونَ, do the Ahlul Bayt fear the Day of Judgment? Fear in this discussion is not the kind of fear that, for example, is the negative attribute, but rather is the consciousness of concern about this idea that this is something important to pay attention to. يَخَافُونَ يَوْمًا كَانَ شَرُّهُ مُسْتَتِيرًا, that they are conscious of and they pay attention to, and they are aware of the fact that there is a day of judgment and that my actions should be guided by that day of judgment. More often than not in our lives, we become busy with this world, we forget the fact that there is a day of judgment that I need to be preparing for. If we were to remember there's a day of judgment that I'm preparing for, maybe our actions would be very different in the decisions we make in life. The career paths that we choose, the responsibilities that we choose, the mortgage that we choose. It would be different if I think about the fact that my job is to prepare for that day of judgment. Here it's describing and say that there are those who fulfill their vows, and there are those who are conscious and they think of the Day of Judgment. One of the very interesting discussions in this verse is يَوْمٌ كَانَ شَرُّهُ مُسْتَتِيرًا, a day whose ill, shar, refers to ill or evil. Is the Day of Judgment evil? Is what Allah does on the Day of Judgment evil? This brings an interesting conversation about why Allah chose this particular word. This fear, first off, of the Day of Judgment, whose calamities and punishment are far-reaching, is the consciousness of that Day of Judgment. The term shar, and what may be described as evil, shar is often used as the Arabic word for evil, symbolizes the terrors and hardships of resurrection. Punishment and adhab is at times described as shar or as an evil because it brings no benefit to the sinner. That something that has no benefit to you is shar, even though it is deserved, that a person deserves this punishment, but because there's no goodness in it, it's only the consequence of my negative deeds, is why many times it's referred to as something evil or something bad, that it doesn't bring me to a better condition, rather it is a punishment from Allah. Allah uses this word in describing يُخَافُونَ يَوْمٌ كَانَ شَرُّهُ مُسْتَتِيرًا, that it's widespread and spread across everything. That description is to describe us of why we should be conscious of the Day of Judgment in our decisions, and why the Ahlul Bayt would be conscious that on that day there will be no escape or putting off or delaying to another time the consequences of our actions. The next verse, the 8th verse, continues and now describes the actions of Ahlul Bayt that we mentioned in this story. وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. This verse too, structurally, is very interesting. I apologize, I get caught up in this. So, يُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ, they feed food, عَلَى حُبِّهِ, though they love it. This حُبِّهِ, this ha at the end, there's a really interesting discussion that says, what does this point to? There are two explanations. That they are the ones who feed food to the needy in spite of hubbihi, loving and needing that food. So Allah is describing that there are those people who feed and give away their food, though they have love or need for that food. This is one interpretation. Many mufassirin point to this description from the other schools of thought. The other explanation is that this hubbihi, this ha, is referring to Allah. That they give away their food ala hubbihi, out of the love of Allah. You can notice the difference between both of these when you look at the translations of the work of who is the translator. Many of the other schools of thought, when they translate this, they describe and say they give away their food out though they love or they need their food. And many of those who are from the madhab of Ahlul Bayt, they point to and they say they give away their food out of the love of Allah, that they go and they give away what they possess. Ala hubbihi, out of their love for Allah, miskinan wa yatiman wa asira. These three descriptions that elaborate to and point to, miskin is someone who is needy, who does not have sufficiency for his needs. This description of someone who is miskin refers to a person who does not have what's called in Arabic qut as-sana. Qut as-sana means sufficiency in their sustenance to have enough to cover their annual expenses. Someone who does not have enough to cover their annual expenses. Now let me explain something. Today we have people who have jobs and you go to work every week. You may not have in your bank account enough money to cover your expenses for the year, but you have a source by which, so you're not considered miskin. All right, so don't imagine that because you go to a 9 to 5, hi, bichara miskin, I don't have. No, you're not miskin. Miskin is someone who does not possess either in actual wealth or potential wealth the ability to meet their expenses for a year. And this is someone who is mustahiq for receiving assistance. This is the miskin. The yatim in Islam refers to someone different than what we understand as an orphan. In Western culture, an orphan is someone who has no father, no mother. As long as one of the parents is alive, you're not considered an orphan. Not in Islam. In Islam, the wilayah and authority over a child sits in the hands of the father. Therefore, the one who loses his father is the one who is referred to as a yatim, because the one who Allah has appointed to be your source of sustenance is missing. Someone other than that individual is fulfilling that responsibility, and that's considered an orphan. The third category in here is very interesting, which is asir, a prisoner. This becomes a very interesting discussion. Who was the prisoner that would come to the door of Ahlul Bayt? Now remember, this is the city of Medina, and Islam is just establishing. That prisoner is not a Muslim who's coming to the door of the Ahlul Bayt. Because if Medina is the capital of Islam, why would there be a Muslim prisoner and come to their door? Rather, this would be a prisoner of war who came to their door. Which brings a really interesting discussion. Why would a prisoner be able to come to their door? In the advent of Islam, there were no prisons. what would happen was that if someone was captured as a prisoner from the atheists or the polytheists, in one of the combats, they would be brought into the city of Medina, and the responsibility to take care of them would be given to some of the Muslimin, who would be told, this prisoner is your responsibility to keep him. He can't leave the city, but he stays here. Now, as the condition of the Muslimin was very poor, what would happen is when they had food in their house and they ate, they would feed this person. But if they didn't have food themselves and this person needed to eat, they would say, go look in the city of Medina and see if any of the Muslimin can provide for you. And thus, the prisoner who was an atheist or a polytheist would wander in the city of Medina and ask the people if there's any food for them, because the family that was hosting them, or that was had the responsibility of their captivity, didn't have any food in the house. So the concept of a prisoner here is really interesting. Now think about it. Ahlul Bayt, hungry for 3 days, 2 days, gave their food to someone who has no sustenance for themselves. Muslim in the city of Islam makes sense. Second person, orphan, from most likely a Muslim, doesn't have any food for himself, makes sense. This third category is showing the care to humanity, that what the Ahlul Bayt espouse is not unique for Muslimin. Yes, the Muslim has a greater right than anyone else, but that should there be someone in need, even if they don't represent Islam, they are still a human being. And to fulfill their need is something recommended. And here the Ahlul Bayt, who they're feeding, is not a Muslim. It's someone outside of the bounds of Islam. Yet, two things are happening here. One, they're giving away their food, and two, Allah is describing this event to teach us that this is a good attribute to possess as well too. And then this becomes the third attribute of the people of piety. One, that they are those who fulfill their vows. Two, they are conscious and prepare for the Day of Judgment. Three, that they are those who give away from that which they possess in the interest of loving and preferring what Allah prefers. And then finally, the fourth of these attributes is mentioned in the next verse. إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. The next verse describes of what the Ahlul Bayt explained as their reason for giving away their food. Certainly we have fed you only for the sake of Allah. We desire no reward from you nor any thanks. Now, amongst the Mufassirin, there's a debate. Did the Ahlul Bayt actually make this statement to the person they were giving food to? And the explanation that, for example, that some of the Mufassirin present is that this is not in a statement that was actually said out loud. Rather, this was the description of the sincerity of their intention that Allah elaborates for us to understand why the Ahlul Bayt did what they did and what we should think about when we have the opportunity to do good. That don't wait for someone to appreciate you when you do kindness to them. Rather, in your heart and in your mind, this is what you should think. I'm not doing this so that you appreciate me. I'm doing this so that Allah accepts me and Allah appreciates or accepts my deed. One of the interesting structures is how they describe liwajhillah. Wajh refers to face. إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ, certainly we have fed you, liwajhillah, for the face of Allah. La nuridu, we don't want from you, minkum, jaza'an, any reward, wala shukura, or any thanks. This phrase, wajhillah, I apologize, I'm very caught up in this. This is a really interesting discussion. We'll finish here and then we'll continue from there. But wajhillah, what is the face of Allah? Does Allah possess a face? This discussion around why there is something called wajhillah refers to the attribute by which Allah wants people to recognize Him most quickly. And refers to that attribute by which Allah will face us and we want Allah to face us. When you think of the face of a person, it's their recognizing characteristic. That it's like if I see somebody from behind, maybe I know who they are, maybe I don't. What do I say? I say I need to see his face to know who he is. Allah describing and saying wajhillah refers to the attribute by which we should be able to recognize Allah and look to Allah for our needs to be met. And that the Ahlul Bayt are saying that our desire for that great overpowering attribute of Allah is the reason why we do all of these things that we do. So what is that one attribute that Allah describes as wajhillah? And that is the rahmah and the mercy of Allah. That is the most great and overpowering attribute, that if you want to beseech Allah for your needs, beseech Him through His mercy to reach all of your needs. Which is why Bismillahir Rahman Rahim, that those two attributes all come from the mercy of Allah, and that mercy of Allah is what's most necessary. And the Ahlul Bayt are describing that our desire is that we approach and receive the rahmah of Allah, the mercy of Allah, which is greater than anything I could deserve, and which is why we do all of these good actions, not because you can do anything for me, but because that mercy of Allah, the way to reach it is through the actions of serving other people. Inshallah, we'll continue this discussion and these attributes in our next discussion next year. And we raise our hands in dua and ask Allah by the right of this day, by the right of the hadirin ghaib, that, oh Allah, first and foremost, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, give us tawfiq to follow the examples of the Quran and learn lessons from the Quran. Ya Allah, give us tawfiq to be amongst the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Ya Allah, give us tawfiq to be those who receive your mercy and rahmah as well. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu s-salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل وسلم على أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب وفاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين والحسن والحسين سيد شباب أهل الجنة وعلي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي باقر وعلم النبيين وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم وعلي بن موسى الرضا ومحمد بن علي الجواد وعلي بن محمد الهادي والحسن بن علي الأسكري وحجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله تعالى مخرجه وظهوره وجعلنا من أعوانه والأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. I enjoin upon you and myself to have fear and piety of Allah. Briefly in our second discussion, it's December 27th. We've reached the end of the year and mashallah, we're all still together. We're all still Muslim. We're all still doing good things. Does this new year and the Roman calendar have any ahmiyah? Does starting this new year with all of these things and, resolutions and all these attributes? No, in terms of Islam, no, it's not significant. If I choose to look at it, for example, as an inflection point for myself, there's nothing wrong with it. But if you take a look and you see the idea that Islam, especially our school of thought, we don't start the new year with celebrations, we start the new year with crying. Hold the Majlis. No, the new year, even the Islamic New Year, was an arbitrary date that was set to give an inflection point in the calendar. And that's what the new year is. It's an inflection point in the calendar to indicate the beginning of a new cycle, to beginning of a new structure. Personally, as an individual, I can choose, and there's nothing wrong with it, to use it as a point to measure my success, my development. As a matter of fact, in Islam, it's really recommended to constantly be measuring yourself. Our Prophet, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, would explain and say, take account of yourself before account is taken for you. So be someone who is always conscious and paying attention to your deeds and measuring your progress and your development before Allah turns and measures your progress and sees what you've accomplished with this life. So in that sense, to use it as a social construct, to be able to measure what we've accomplished, what we're doing, are we improving, are we changing, are we becoming better people? Great, go ahead. Nothing wrong with it. Should we be celebrating? More often than not, if we actually looked at our book of deeds, we'd probably be sad than we would be celebrating that another year has passed and I haven't made the progress that I want to in my life. So this idea of celebrating something, that if I'm going away from the path that I need to and I'm sitting there celebrating about it, that would be a foolish thing to do. So celebration is not important to us. It's not significant. This isn't necessarily something to celebrate. It's something to be conscious of and to use it appropriately. One who, for example, celebrates it and is lost in its celebrations and lost in its pleasures. Look at the example, for example, when our second Imam came upon people who were celebrating excessively in the term of Eid. And he looked at them and he said that true celebration is one who avoids sin. And any day that you're avoiding sin is a day of celebration, not like this, that through this process you commit more sins or you make more mistakes. So we want to be careful. We don't want to adopt every attribute of society that society presents to us and says it's a good idea. Society doesn't think about akhirah, doesn't think about that I have to answer for my deeds, doesn't think about accounting in the face of what Allah will ask me for and that I should prepare for that accounting by preparing my books. I think about that. We think about that. And that's why this start of a new year, there's nothing wrong with it. Enjoy it. But enjoy it correctly by preparing yourself. There are some actions, when we talk about the akhlaqiyat and the character of Ahlul Bayt, that are really important for us to implement into our character. Use this, and this is a piece of advice that I intend to apply for myself and I share with you. There's a hadith from the Prophet that talks about certain attributes that are part of the best of humanity in this world and the hereafter. If I'm going to use the new year as a point of inflection, I want to use this new year as a point of inflection to see that across this next year, can I implement these attributes into my character? And fair warning, they're not easy, but they're really valuable. We see our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam asks his companions a question, أَلَا أُخْبِرُكُمْ بِخَيْرِ خَلَائِكِ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. Shall I inform you and tell you about who is considered the best of creation in this world and the hereafter? And they say, yes, Ya Rasulullah, explain to us. And Rasulullah begins and elaborates on the following attributes. Al-afu amman dhalamak. It is the one who forgives the person who has oppressed him or wronged him. And then he continues, وَالْأَحْسَانُ إِلَى مَنْ أَسَاءَ إِلَيْكَ. And it is the one who does good to the person who has done evil to him. And then he continues further, he says, وَأَعْتَاءُ مَنْ حَرَمَكَ. And it is the one who gives to the person who deprived him. 3 attributes the Prophet mentioned so far, and each one of them is more difficult than the next. The first of these is the one, forgive the one who wrongs you. We have this policy in America, I'll forgive but I won't forget. It's not forgiveness. True forgiveness is forgiving and forgetting. Understand something. You want Allah to forgive you, right? Yes? Please, you want Allah to forgive you? Thank you. It's like we need to have another conversation here. I want Allah to forgive me. Do I want Him to remind me of the mistake that He forgave me for? Do I want Him to hold me accountable for that on the Day of Judgment? This is the mistake that we make. When we forgive someone, we say, I'm always going to remember and I'm always going to hold you to it. Or we say, I can't be normal with you because you committed that mistake. You forgave me. I forgave you, but I can't forget it. That's not the forgiveness that Allah wants from us. The forgiveness the Prophet is talking about, and the forgiveness that we want from Allah is the forgiveness we have to give to people, which is forgive the one who wronged you, in a sense that forget that it ever happened. Then you have forgiven. Don't ever hold it against them, that once you've forgiven it, it's gone. It's completely gone. Then the next attribute, do good to the one who does evil to you. How hard is that? Our natural reaction is, you did evil to me. One is, I do evil to you. If I don't do evil to you, I become indifferent to you. You're dead to me. Here, the Prophet is saying, you want to be the best of humanity? Do good to the one who does evil to you. How hard is that? And that third, give to the one who deprives you. You refuse to give me, yet I give you. It's not an easy attribute to develop. And the Prophet goes further, it's not done here. He mentions, وَقَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ فِي التَّبَاغِضَ حَالَكَ. That those who have hatred in themselves, there is a halaka, a destruction, a separation. And then he continues, لا أعني الحالكة الشعر. Not like the cutting of sha'r, the cutting of hair, because halaka is also one of the ways that you describe getting a haircut. So our Prophet says, he says, one who keeps his anger and mutual hatred for each other, there is a severance, but not like the severance or the cutting of hair, but rather, ولكن أعني حالكة الدين. That your faith gets destroyed by that anger that lives inside of you. These 4 attributes are things that we should work on developing in this new year if we want to make resolutions for ourselves. 1, forgive in such a way that someone has wronged me, I forgive them and I forget about it. I don't mention it, I don't hold it in my heart, I don't look at them with anger, I don't think about it, and I don't hold it against them. Forgive in that way. 2 is that do good to the one who harms you or who does wrong to you. That still do good to that person, regardless of how they've treated you. Your relationship with another person is not a reflection of what they did to you, it's a reflection of your character. So someone does wrong to me, I don't reply with wrong because that shows my character. I show my character as goodness in spite of their bad doing. And giving to the one who deprives me, give not because that person deserves it or that they did a kindness to me so I give to them. Give because my giving to that person is a wasila to reach closer to Allah. And then even if they deprive me, it doesn't bother me. It won't hurt me. I won't think about the fact that you didn't give me, now here, look and see how good I am. Because you're not my goal. My goal is to get closer to Allah. You're simply a tool by which I'll get closer to Allah. And then finally, don't hold anger in your heart towards anyone. Because that anger will destroy your faith. How many of us have somebody in our relationships, in our groups, in our connections, that we say, I never want to speak to this person again? It's not Islam. That's not what we do. So that's it. If we're going to make changes for this coming year, yes, walking 10,000 steps a day is fantastic. But if you really want to measure change in your life, it's not going to be through the steps or the calories you're counting. It's going to be through the character that we're changing in our behavior. We ask Allah again by the right of this day, by the right of the Hadirin Ghaibin, that, oh Allah, first and foremost, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Oh Allah, by the right of this day, by the right of the Quran and Ahlul Bayt, we have come here with hajat. By the right of this day, fulfill our hajat. Oh Allah, there are those amongst our families, our communities that are suffering through sickness and disease. By the right of this day, by the right of the Quran and Ahlul Bayt, give shafa'at to the mu'mineen and Muslimin wherever they are. Oh Allah, those who continue to suffer through strife and insecurity and difficulty, give aman to the mu'mineen, Muslimin people wherever they are in this land. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make this the last year that we are without our Imam. Oh Allah, make us and our families from the upright supporters of our Imam. And entitle us to the ziyarat of Imam Hussain in this world and the shafa of Imam Hussain in the hereafter. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna Allah ya'muru bil-adli wal-ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal-munkar wal-baghi ya'idukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim.